welcome to ET India Rising, powered by Visa. I'm Miloni Bhatt. Now here's a show where we speak to corporate leaders and to policy experts, where they define for us the roadmap for India at 100, the priorities, the potential and the policies that we need to put in place to ensure that India becomes the global superpower that it envisages to be. And today I'm very happy to welcome Parameswaran Iyer, who is the CEO of NITI Aayog. Sir, thank you so very much for your time and for joining us here today. It's a pleasure for us to have you here.
Thank you, Miloni. Likewise, a pleasure to be with you.
So I want to start with the global economy. Global growth is expected to slow down in this year, in 2023, because of high inflation across the world, because of high interest rates, and also because in the background of the war between Russia and Ukraine and the lingering effects of COVID. Many say India is well placed. But what are the 2 or 3 things that you think we need to do so that we ensure that we are resilient?
Sure. As you said, Miloni, global headwinds. But I think despite these headwinds coming out of the pandemic or even the Ukraine situation, India has turned out to be one of the bright spots in the global economy. I think overall our macro fiscal stability is continuing. IMF, World Bank, all of them have predicted anywhere from 6.5 to 7% growth. So I think, but the 2 or 3 important things to keep us going in the short to medium term, first of all, I think is fiscal consolidation. And you saw from the budget how we have managed to hold it at 6.4 in this year, but the finance minister has going to bring it down to 5.9% next year, and we are on track for 4.5% in 25-26. So I think fiscal consolidation is going to be very, very important, and I think all indications are we will continue with that. The second important point, I think, is the continued investment. Capital expenditure, you saw from the budget, 10 lakh crores, a 33% increase over this year predicted for next year. In addition to that, the continuation of the 50-year interest-free loan to states, 1.3 lakh crores. And this will also incentivize state governments to increase their capital expenditure and also crowd in private capital. I think that's an important trend. How do we crowd in? There's an increasing trend in terms of private capital coming in. So I think that's the second important thing. The third, of course, is the financial sector. And I think we have seen a steady growth of credit, but inflation has also been brought under control. And if you look at non-performing assets, gross NPAs have come down from about 11% 4 or 5 years ago to 5 to 6%. So I think that trend is also important. But looking ahead, skilling is going to be key, right? Yeah. How do we train our youth force? So if you saw in the budget again, the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Yojana 4.0 is now looking at skills for the future, whether it's AI or blockchain. It's really important to take our skilling program to another level. And I would say finally, if you look at again the budget, income tax rationalization and some more money in the hands of income taxpayers in the new scheme from 5 to 7 lakhs. I think that's going to put more money in their hands, and India's market is a huge incentive for manufacturing and investment. So the consumption will also drive the economy. I think all these are signs that even in the medium term, this is a budget which is looking ahead.
There's another fact. India wants to be a $5 trillion economy by 2030. How do you see the global headwinds impacting that aim? And, what do you still think about the number? Are we overshooting it?
If you look at the vision the Prime Minister has articulated over the Amrit Kaal, this is the first budget of Amrit Kaal. So by 2047, which is also the overall framework of your series, for India, this is the first time any Prime Minister has articulated a vision of India becoming a developed country by 2047. And that itself, I think, is a very significant milestone to achieve. But what are those building blocks towards that? So whatever we just discussed, in terms of India's growth path, its growth with inclusion, the fiscal reforms we have taken, the policy reforms, whether it's GST, whether it's PLI, whether it's insolvency and bankruptcy code, the new digital, the whole thrust on digital 2.0, I think that overall we are well on track. Obviously, we need to sort of take it one block at a time. But I think the building blocks which have been set in place over the last 8 years and the measures we have taken and we are continuing to take as articulated in the budget, all this is keeping us on track despite the global headwinds. We have got to be cautious, but we're also optimistic.
Right, and sticking with the theme of the global headwinds, India has taken on the presidency of the G20 at a very tumultuous time for the global economy. But how do you think India can actually shape the architecture, when it comes to global economic policies to ensure that, it maintains its status?
I think it's a huge opportunity for India to not only, showcase its achievements over the last 7 or 8 years, but also an opportunity for India to lead. So the Global South to lead on a number of fronts. So there are 4 or 5 important themes of the G20 presidency. Let me try to list them. So one, of course, is going to be environment, climate, and lifestyle for the environment. The second is going to be the energy transition. But the digital economy and data for development, an equally important area in which India can really showcase its strength. Then, of course, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, how can they be accelerated? India has demonstrated in multiple SDGs how we have not only scaled them up, but we have done it well before the 2030 deadline. Then there is the reform of the multinational institutions. We are playing an important role in that. And I would say last but not least is women-led development. How we can position all the work we have done for women empowerment and leadership. So I think these 4 or 5 themes will enable us to showcase our strengths, but not only that, to contribute to the world. Just if you look at the world in terms of inclusion in digital terms, there are still 4 billion people who have no digital identity across the world. There are 2 billion people without bank accounts, and more than 120 countries still transact in cash. With our huge explosion in terms of digital payments, identity, etc., there's a huge contribution in that space which we can contribute to other countries, particularly in the Global South.
You pointed out women development and women-led growth, and on this point, I also want to mention the fact that when it comes to women's participation in the Indian economy, it is pretty abysmal. The numbers are very, very low. We have very few women in the workforce, and a lot of them are in informal jobs and jobs that don't pay well. If we have to bolster the she economy, what should be the action agenda for it?
Yeah, no, I think that even if you look at the labor force participation rate of women, I think that's increased. Of course, there's a conversation around how you measure that. But if you look at the steps the government has taken for the empowerment of women, I think they have been quite phenomenal. If you recall the Prime Minister's speech, 15th August 22, where he started out by talking about how important it was for Nari Shakti and Nari Ka Samman. So this government has done a lot of, if you look at the different programs for women empowerment from the beginning, starting out with basic services. In the Swachh Bharat mission, right? The safety, security, and dignity of women, huge transformation. You look at the Jal Jeevan mission, so that you have a tap at home and you don't have to spend all that time walking long distances to fetch water. More than 11 crore household taps already done, well on its way. Financial inclusion, whether you look at the Ujjwala program. So I think a huge number of programs for women. But not only that, if you look at other more policy-related measures, if you look at the maternity leave was increased by the government from 12 weeks to 26 weeks. So again, that's going to obviously give them more comfort and the ability to come back to their job with confidence and having taken care of the child. So I think in addition to that, the creches in workplace, another big difference. And if you look at entrepreneurship, now under the Mudra scheme, about 65 to 70% of the beneficiaries are actually women entrepreneurs. NITI Aayog itself has a program called the Women Entrepreneurship Program, which focuses on helping, facilitating, building the capacity of women who are in the startup business. So I think a lot of work has been done. Obviously, more needs to be done, but women empowerment, a key focus of this government. And as we discussed, it's going to be a key agenda of the G20 as well.
So you touched upon MSME and industry, and I want to speak about the exports bit of it. Currently, India's share of global trade is about 2% and our aim is to have exports touch $2 trillion by 2030. But there is a real challenge, and when you speak to MSMEs, one of the things that they say is about competitiveness. So how do we bring our MSMEs, or how do we make them globally competitive?
As you said, 6 crore MSMEs, more than 11 crore employed, a very significant part of the economy. But of course, and also, about 40-45% of exports as well. So clearly playing a major role in exports in the economy. Let me come to the budget again. A couple of points in the budget. One, of course, is the revamped credit guarantee scheme for MSMEs, 9,000 crores. So I think that itself will give it a big fill-up, and of course, it will help the exports. Beyond that, there are about 50 plus export facilitation centers, specifically for MSMEs. How do you connect them to the markets domestically and internationally? And if you look at what is called the Open Network Digital Commerce platform, again, it's really about sort of democratizing e-commerce, getting MSMEs to compete, and in fact, Amazon, Flipkart, and others are planning to join this platform. So I think that will give them much more exposure and give them sort of cradle to grave connectivity, if you like, in terms of how can they increase their export competitiveness. In addition to this, at the recent Chief Secretary's conference, MSME figured very prominently as a key driver of growth and jobs. And one major recommendation was to develop one online platform, which will connect the seller, the producer, the supplier of raw material, marketing, have one integrated platform where all MSMEs can register themselves. And that will also facilitate not only manufacturing, but also export.
We have the Udyam portal any which way. So this will be like Udyam, or this?
So we have the Udyam, but even in Udyam, we need more registrations. So registration is low. So the idea is where they're considering whether this will be separate, it will be part of Udyam. How can we make Udyam more user-friendly and more comprehensive and get all the stakeholders in that MSME ecosystem to participate?
And now I want to move to the logistics sector. Logistics, when it comes to logistics expenses, it's about 14% of our GDP. And, the aim is really to bring it down to 8%. The problem with logistics really is that 90% of that sector is unorganized. How do you see the roadmap, when it comes to building competitiveness there and also ensuring that we bring down this cost?
No, as you said, the objective is to bring the cost down to less than 10%. And of course, you would have taken note of the National Logistics Policy, which was launched in September last year, a major initiative which pulled together all the different aspects, the policy aspects, the implementation aspects of logistics. So I think 3 or 4 points to note there. First of all, if you take note of what is called as ULIP, Unified Logistics Interface Platform. This is something which NITI Aayog worked with, together with Department of Industries and Internal Trade. It's a very significant platform which pulls together all the stakeholders, government departments, manufacturers, associations, enterprises. And what it does is, it essentially significantly brings in just-in-time in terms of inventory control. You can monitor, it reduces costs, and it really enhances our international competitiveness. ULIP is a very important part of the new logistics policy. But also in terms of transport, how to bring down transport costs. It streamlines, it brings everyone together on one platform. In terms of the skills required, the human resources required to strengthen our capacity to deal with logistics. So training, it's all under the new policy. And I think importantly here, the role of digital, cutting across all of this, is really reducing transaction costs and improving logistics. Now, obviously, this needs to be rolled out, but the policy is the first step. And we're quite confident that given this experience, the early experience, that this policy and the platform will really help to improve the efficiency and also drive down costs of logistics.
While we are speaking of logistics and transportation, we want to touch upon EV. Yesterday I was taking a walk through the markets of Delhi, and there I saw actually 3 charging stations, EV charging stations. There were no vehicles which were being charged over there. EVs are expensive, but if we need to have sustainable mobility, then they're a big piece of that. Now, how do we increase EV adoption, and what are the infrastructural challenges, because there are many that are there right now for India? How do we overcome them, and what do you see as the bottlenecks for us to be able to transition to EV?
Like you said, this is going to be fast growing, it's going to be a huge part of greening the economy. I mean, green mobility a major part of that is EVs, which is estimated to touch 200 billion by the market by 2030. So it's a fast growing market, particularly in the 2 and 3 wheeler segment, but increasingly in the 4 wheeler, electric buses, very much there. So it's a major part of India's energy transition story. Now, in terms of the infrastructure required, as you mentioned, you saw a few charging stations, and clearly increasing the number of charging stations, particularly along the highways, including in the hinterland. I think that will be quite important. So that's one important thing. Also, getting into a grid level capacity. That will be the second important thing. Now, as you know, NITI Aayog has been working a lot on this with the Department of Heavy Industries. So, but if you look at the overall story in terms of manufacturing of batteries through the PLI program, the advanced chemistry cell part of the PLI, that's moving along well. So I think all in all, with the policy set in place and the incentives for manufacturers, particularly through the PLI scheme, this segment is going to grow. But of course, the need for the charging infrastructure needs to keep pace with the development of the market, and I think government is well seized of this.
Also, EVs are really a potential, right, and an opportunity for India. How do you see this sort of powering industry, powering our economy?
Yeah, no, particularly for the MSME sector, if you see, today many of them are supplying components to the manufacturing sector of automobiles in the internal combustion engine sector, the ICE sector. I think now there's a big opportunity for them to become manufacturers themselves, whether it's 2-wheelers or 3-wheelers or even 4-wheelers. So it's a big opportunity for industry, particularly for MSMEs. So I think this is a segment which is going to grow. It's a major contributor to the economy. And clearly EVs are here not only to stay, but to move forward on a transformational growth path.
Since we're speaking of sustainable mobility, I wanted to touch upon the theme of sustainability. And, one of the things is that India is making a huge push for green hydrogen. Now, how optimistic are you that green hydrogen is the fuel of the future? Because there are many experts who've come in and said that there are a few problems. First is that it's quite expensive, cost-wise. There are problems when it comes to storage because it's a little volatile. And also there is no demand right now from industry. What are your thoughts?
Miloni, we've really got to look to the future. Green hydrogen is a phenomenal opportunity. And we want to make sure that we are one of the leaders in this very nascent race. So everyone is scrambling now to get into a dominant position. And the announcement of the green hydrogen mission, this 20,000 crore mission, has been a huge step in that direction. It consists of 2 parts. About 4,000 crores is incentivizing the manufacture of electrolyzers. And then about the remaining, about 14,000 crores is for the actual manufacture of green hydrogen. It's a very ambitious target, 5 million tons a year by 2030 on an annual basis. Now that's huge, and then a lot of it will be for export. So in terms of ambition, it's very big. We've got to look to the future. Now, obviously, you need to have clean water for this. So, you've got to make sure that you've got the inputs. You need renewable energy. Our renewable energy story, again, is very, very bright. It's 40% of overall, if you look at the overall energy mix. And when we started talking of renewable energy 10, 15 years ago, everyone said, hey, the costs are too high.
Yeah.
But if you see now, they've come down very significantly. So green hydrogen manufacture, we've got a huge market here. And therefore, it's greening the industry, steel, petroleum, fertilizers. So it's a big part of India's nationally determined contributions, our climate commitments. So if you look at it in the medium to long term, India is going to position itself as a major player in this market. It's also taking us towards net zero.
Sir, on sustainability, I also want to touch upon something that the NITI Aayog is doing. And in October last year, the Prime Minister launched a global mission called Lifestyle for Environment, which the NITI Aayog is leading along with the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. And at the first development working group of G20 in Mumbai, you mentioned Mission Lifestyle for Environment is a dedicated mission mode and India-led global movement that aims to bring individual and community behavior at the center of climate action. Climate action, of course, is a big part of what India wants to do, positive climate action. So tell us a little bit about Mission Life.
Sure, the Prime Minister really took the world by storm at Glasgow at COP26 in November 21, when he first announced the concept of Mission Life, lifestyle for the environment. It's a fascinating concept, which in many ways is the other end of the climate debate. Think of it from the demand side. On the one side, you've got the science, the evidence, the policy, the financing, and the nationally determined contributions. And then you've got what can people do, what can communities do to actually walk the talk on climate. So India is the first country in the world to include lifestyle for the environment as part of its NDCs. So that's very, very important to take note of. The second is, so what can you actually do? There is actually a United Nations Environment Program, UNEP report, which says that individuals can, by their actions, can actually reduce emissions by up to 20%. So that's very significant. Simple actions, using less water, so water conservation, not using single-use plastic, household segregation, taking public transport, not wasting food. Traditionally, Indians have been in harmony with nature. So, but this is a global movement led by the South. So the Prime Minister has put that on the agenda because the point is we are walking the talk on climate while the world is debating. And so I think that's a very important concept. It's going to be a major lead figure in the G20. But I think it's also important to look at it from a broader concept. So in nudging individual behavior will lead to a supply response. So demanding more environmentally friendly products will nudge industry and companies to produce them, and then that leads to a policy response by the government as well. So it's much more than individuals and communities acting, but at its core, it's about what can people do, what can communities do, and how can it become what we call a Jan Andolan, so that people take up this movement and it spreads globally. So I think that's at the heart of life, and in the G20, it's going to permeate multiple working groups.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about how NITI Aayog is actually powering it, and what are the different things that you're doing?
Sure. So in NITI Aayog, we have a small unit called a Behavioral Insights Unit. Right. So how do you nudge behavior? So NITI has been incubating the concept of life, working together with the Ministry of Forests, Environment and Climate Change, helping them to roll it out nationally. While we support them, we provide the ideas, the innovations, and we're also working with the Ministry of External Affairs to see how this program can be rolled out already. Right. If you remember at the launch, we had 10 heads of state endorsing life. So life has already picked up. It featured in COP27. It's very much on the international arena now. And again, as I said, through the G20, it will be taken even further globally.
All right, and we wish you all the success with it.
Thanks.
When it comes to financial inclusion, fintechs, digital banks, they're expanding financial inclusion when it comes to India. But the other side of the reality is also that there is a deep digital divide and a financial divide for large swaths of the Indian population. How are we going to be able to bridge that? And what is the opportunity for India if we are able to overcome?
In many ways, financial inclusion, or even if you talk of fintech, India's leading the world. There's an index which says we are at something like over 85% compared to a global average of 60 odd percent. So in many ways, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a revolution on digital, but also on bridging the digital divide. So in some ways, you could say the story of our fintech or our digital story is a story of innovation, implementation, and inclusion. And what do I mean by that? Now, with the huge scale up of UPI, UPI transactions in 2022 were over 7 billion alone. So India is basically transacting digitally.
Right.
And if you look at our, 1,200 million, 1.2 billion mobile users, 800 million data users, the cost of data has dramatically come down. Building on the backbone of Aadhaar, in many ways now, you can say that the digital explosion, or India's stack, if you want to look at it, has brought together data, identity, and payment. And in many ways now, life has become much easier. So ease of living through what? Through paperless, cashless, some presence-less, and consent through Aadhaar. So now this is moving into the agri space as well. And we heard a little bit about that in the budget. So I think there's been a huge explosion. It has also gone into the hinterland to a large extent. But of course, there's much more way to go. And let me come up with what more needs to be done. So BharatNet is going right down. And it's already reached the Gram Panchayats. And now it's going to go all the way down to villages. And then it becomes a public-private partnership because local operators will set up Wi-Fi in villages. So that stage is yet to come, but that's underway. Then of course, there's probably more need for financial inclusion and literacy at a local level. There are a couple of government programs to encourage literacy. So I think while we have made huge strides, now we need to take this all the way right down to the grassroots. It's well underway. But overall, I was in Davos a couple of weeks ago, and the world was fascinated to hear the story of how India has exploded digitally, where everyone is using, digital payments. So our digital public infrastructure story has really taken off. It's already gone to scale. And of course, we need to take it to another level.
This is my last question to you. You worked in the government, you worked outside the government. From your vantage, how do you see the role of the government evolve over the next 25 years? And, how do you see the public, the private partnerships come together and to build India?
I have to tell you, Miloni, I'm seeing a very different government today than I saw, 10, 15 years ago when I was still in government. And then, of course, I went to the World Bank. I had the privilege of being recalled to lead the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation and implement Prime Minister's flagship program, the Swachh Bharat Mission. And then I returned to the World Bank, and I've come back about 7 months ago. Every time I come back, you see a transformational change. This is a government now which believes in good governance. And it's brought about a transformative change in the way governance is done. Let me give you a couple of examples which shows the change. So again, today, government is working as a facilitator. It's encouraging, so ease of business and ease of living. So whether you're an enterprise, an industrialist, or a startup, or you're a citizen, life is really, ease of living has gone through an ease of business. Compliances, more than 40,000 have been reduced. Provisions have been scrapped. So decriminalization has taken place. So there's a sea change taking place in terms of what the Prime Minister spoke about, reducing government and improving governance. And I think that is one major change. The second change I'm seeing is how, citizens now, they don't really need to come to government offices too often. Earlier you had to go to the Tehsildar's office for a land certificate, you had to go to a bank, you had to go to the RTO. So now it is dramatic. So governance has changed for the citizen. The less they see of government, the less people they meet, the less face-to-face interaction, the easier it is. Another thing. And I think that government is increasingly seeing itself as a facilitator rather than a provider. Now, where there are imperfect markets, where you have inequality, then of course government has got a very important role. So provision of basic services. Look at the huge difference between today and 30, 40 years ago. If you remember, a former Prime Minister very famously said that out of every rupee spent, I think 14 or 15 paisa actually reaches the targeted beneficiary. Today, that is completely transformed through direct benefit transfer. In 2013, someone told me only about 10,000 crores were directly going to beneficiaries through government programs. Today, it's more than 10 lakh crores and increasing. So the money which government spends is increasingly going down into the pocket of the beneficiary. Business is becoming ease of doing business. We improved dramatically in the World Bank ranking. So I think overall, governance has improved. And I think as we're looking ahead towards 2047, what would government look like then? So there is a process of reimagining the role of government. And I think it's all about making the lives of its citizens easier and moving from, sort of command and control to a facilitator and almost making itself invisible as you go forward. I think that's the ultimate aim. And I think we're well on that path.
It will be good for India, and we hope that is the path that India manages to take. Of course, there is a long road ahead, and it's a journey. We're all in it together. But Parameswaran Iyer, CEO, NITI Aayog, thank you so very much for your thoughts and for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Miloni. Pleasure to be with you.